Climate change affects global weather patterns, and if you look at the history of how climate change has been debated here in Washington, D.C., it doesn't take you very long to realize one party, for the most part, has taken it very seriously, and the other party, not so much. And I must warn you, you are about to watch what is truly one of the dumbest moments from the modern history of the United States Congress.
Of national attention, and in case we have forgotten, because we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out, very unseasonal. So here, Mr. President, catch this.
Oh, my Lord, give me the strength. That was not a parody video, nor was that a sketch from Saturday Night Live. That was a real U.S. Senator, Republican James Inhofe of the great state of Oklahoma, back in February of 2015, holding up a snowball as proof that climate change is a hoax. If there's climate change, why is there snow outside? That's literally what he did. That's the Senate floor. That's one of the most powerful human beings in the world. Do you understand that? Inhofe even wrote a book about it. And it's tough to imagine someone more firmly planting himself on the losing side of history than Senator Inhofe in this moment a few years back. I still can't believe that's a thing. The Republican Party as a whole has largely struggled to come to terms with climate change because it's inconvenient. That was made abundantly clear when former President Donald Trump used to regularly mock the idea of a man-made warming climate. And while the GOP struggles on climate messaging, some Republicans do strike the right notes.
Speak out, speak up. Call lunacy what it is, lunacy. Tell the American people that we still have moonshots in us. Tell the folks at the county party convention, you bet free enterprise can solve climate change. Tell them that Milton Friedman would say to tax pollution rather than profits.
Call lunacy what it is. There's a lot of lunacy in Washington, especially on the climate debate. But it's not every day you hear a conservative say we must do better by our climate. That gentleman you just saw there, that's from a TED Talk from former House Congressman Bob Inglis of South Carolina. His mission now is to convince other Republicans, other conservatives, that they need to wake up to the enormity of the climate crisis. Bob Inglis joins me now. Welcome to the show, Mr. Inglis. Really good to have you here. I do want to start with a look back here. You lost your seat in Congress several years ago after largely pronouncing your belief in man-made global warming. Do you have any regrets about how you began to frame this issue towards the end of your congressional career?
No regrets, really. It's one thing to lose a seat in Congress. It's quite another to lose your soul. So I lost a seat in Congress, didn't lose my soul. So I think I'm all right with that deal.
Bob, how did how did your view of this issue evolve over the course of your career? When you first ran for Congress, did you believe the things with regards to the climate that you hold dear now?
No, my first 6 years in Congress, I said climate change is nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. So I admit that's pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was for my first 6 years in Congress. Out 6 years doing commercial real estate law, came back for another 6 with a very different affect because of the influence of my son and his 4 sisters, a trip to Antarctica with the Science Committee, and really a spiritual awakening on another Science Committee trip, seeing the faith of an Aussie climate scientist who is in the business of loving God and loving people by caring about what kind of planet we're going to leave people.
Are other Republicans, even ones who are still in Congress, are they receptive to the messaging that you now hold to be true? Are they receptive to what you have to say? Are you able to say, hey, I was once like you, I was wrong, and now we need to do better? Or do they not really want to hear from the Bob Inglises of the world?
Well, it's changed. It was, when I got tossed out of Congress, those were the darkest days of the Great Recession. It's so much better now, because we have people that realize that climate change is real, so we don't have quite as much disputation of the science. But what we still have is this search for solutions, because I think what we have is people not sure they can find a solution that fits with their values. And that's what we've got to do as conservatives. On what we call the eco-right, balance the environmental left, we got to show fellow conservatives that there really are free enterprise solutions to this. And at the end of the day, we'll probably find out that many progressives actually agree with us. So it's possible to bring America together and lead the world to solutions.
Members of Congress today, especially those progressive Democrats, they talk about things like the Green New Deal, which is trying to be weaponized by many Republicans and people in conservative media. They're trying to bash it. What do free enterprise-based climate solutions look like? What's the role for private-public partnerships in this?
Well, mostly it's having the government step in, and yes, it is the government that has to do this, to step in and say no more dumping on your neighbors. That could be small particulates dumping. It could be CO2 dumping. That's basically the problem, is that we get away with dumping on our neighbors. And there's an important role for government in saying, wait a minute, we need biblical accountability here. English common law, American common law all say the same thing. You just can't do that. You can't do on something on your property that harms somebody else's person or property. And so there's a role for the government there. Economists would describe that as internalizing negative externalities. In other words, the negative effects of burning fossil fuels. That, we think, is the most powerful thing that a government can do, and it's rock solid conservatism.
I want to talk to you about the carbon tax, because I remember, to me, this is an issue where, Republicans as a whole oftentimes don't want to have the conversation, but Florida Republicans do. And I think if you're a Florida Republican, if you're someone in the House like Matt Gaetz, or you're a former congressman like Carlos Curbelo, you know these guys, they're sitting there and dealing with an electorate that even if they love Donald Trump, they still sit there and say the climate's a massive problem. Our real estate's being threatened. The water level is rising. We're worried about the future of Florida. Florida Republicans view this differently. And so a lot of them have proposed what's known as a carbon tax. And I know that you have been supportive of that. Talk to our viewers about what a carbon tax means for people who may be unfamiliar. Why is that the best solution? And do you still stand by that?
Yeah, and of course you're right about Florida. The felt need there is substantial because water's coming up. And so what a carbon tax would do is basically what I was just describing. It internalizes, in other words, puts into the cost of products the negative effects of the burning of fossil fuels. It essentially is like a tipping fee at the city dump. If you're a trash hauler, you got to pay the city dump for the space that you're taking up with that load you're bringing to the dump. Well, that makes sense for us as conservatives, and really progressives agree with that too. The city's going to have to build a new dump once we fill this one up. So charge people as we go for the space they take. Same thing's happening in the atmosphere. We have a certain amount of space up there for CO2, for waste that we produce in the form of CO2. And so charging for that space is a very efficient way to allocate that resource. And so that's the thing is that's so interesting here is that you'd be hard pressed to find an economist who disagrees with what I just said. In fact, I'm just borrowing from them. And that is left, right, and center economists all would say that's the first and most obvious thing to do. So yes, people like Carlos Curbelo, Francis Rooney have been on this thing. These are Florida members of Congress, former members of Congress, who've been on this idea of pricing carbon dioxide. It really makes sense.
Bob, before I let you go, Donald Trump, for good or for bad, I don't know your personal views on it, he is still the standard bearer of the GOP. He used to sit there and tweet, well, it's cold out. We could use a little bit more global warming. This is not a man who takes this issue seriously. I think we can all say that. Is that concerning to you, that the most powerful, potent, and important Republican in the country has that regressive of a view on such an important issue? Is that a problem?
Yeah, it's a problem. And of course, what it reflects is Donald Trump's short-term horizon. He wanted to eke out one more victory in 2020. But if you look on, for example, onto the side of Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, he's focused longer term, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. He'd like to be speaker in all of those years. And he knows he can't win the speakership without winning suburban districts. And you can't win suburban districts with a retro position on climate change. So people like Kevin McCarthy have a longer time horizon that they're looking at. And that's what we hope takes hold, because people like Kevin see that young conservatives want action on climate as much as young progressives do.
Absolutely. Do need to leave things there. Let's hope for the good of everyone in this country and the world that we can get both parties on the same page. And I like where your head is at. That's former House Congressman Bob Inglis of the great state of South Carolina. Thanks a lot, Bob. Great to have you here tonight.